She was 9 months pregnant when her husband forced her to crawl on the floor in front of his guests. Laughed at,
They thought she was weak.
humiliated,
They thought she
thrown
was
out into the
broken.
rain
They
like
thought
she was
fear would
nothing.
keep her
But
silent
as she lay in
forever.
the mud that night, clutching her unborn children, she made one silent promise. I will crawl today so I can rise tomorrow. And years later, she returned with triplets and with power no one saw coming. Zuri once believed marriage was a shelter, a place where love softened the world and two people carried life together. When she married Bulma, the city whispered envy. He had money, status, a house that gleamed with marble floors and glass walls. From the outside, it looked like a dream. From the inside, it was a cage. Bulma never wanted a wife. He wanted a possession. At first, his control wore the mask of concern. Why are you wearing that? Then it became correction. You don't speak like that in front of people. Soon, it turned into command. Do as you're told. Every small mistake became a public insult. Every question became disrespect. And every silence, her silence, became proof that his power was working. Zuri learned quickly that peace did not come from being happy. It came from being quiet. His mother lived nearby, watching everything with sharp, knowing eyes. When Bulma raised his voice, she said nothing. When Zuri cried, she turned away. Sometimes she smiled, not with joy, but with approval, as if this was how wives were meant to be shaped. Pregnancy should have softened Bulma. Instead, it hardened him. At 9 months, Zuri's body ached with life growing inside her. Her feet swelled. Her back burned. Each breath felt heavy, precious. Yet Bulma's expectations never bent. If she moved too slowly, he mocked her. If she rested, he accused her of laziness. She told herself endurance was love, that strong women stayed, that patience would be rewarded. So she swallowed her pain again and again, until it became part of her breathing. What Zuri didn't realize was that every time she shrank herself to survive, something inside her faded. Her laughter came less often. Her voice softened into a whisper. The woman she once was, hopeful, warm, alive, began to disappear quietly, without anyone noticing. Except one truth her heart kept repeating in the dark. This wasn't marriage. This was captivity. And the worst prisons aren't made of walls. They're built with fear, silence, and the lie that suffering is love. Pregnancy should have softened Bulma. It should have slowed his anger, quieted his temper, reminded him that life, fragile and innocent, was growing inside his wife. Instead, it hardened him. As Zuri's belly grew heavy, so did his demands. Dawn was no longer a beginning. It was a deadline. Before the sun fully rose, she was already on her feet, her back aching, her hands trembling as she moved through the cold halls of the house. Cooking, cleaning, serving, repeating. There were no allowances for swollen ankles or dizzy spells. No mercy for a body stretched to its limits. When she paused to catch her breath, Bulma's voice cut through the air. Pregnancy is not an illness, he sneered. Women have been giving birth for centuries. Rest in his house was called laziness. Pain was labeled weakness. And tears? Tears were an insult to his authority. Zuri learned to hide them. Her mother-in-law watched from the side, correcting her posture, criticizing her movements. Stand straight. Move faster. Smile when guests are here. Zuri obeyed, even when every step sent sharp pain through her spine, even when her vision blurred and her hands shook. The house was often full of visitors, business partners, relatives, friends. Laughter echoed through the living room. Glasses clinked. Conversations flowed easily. And in the middle of it all, Zuri moved silently, a servant in her own home. Look at her, someone joked once as she struggled to carry a tray, her belly pulling her forward. She walks like she's carrying the whole house. Laughter erupted. Bulma didn't stop them. He joined them. That was the moment something inside Zuri cracked. Her dignity became entertainment. Her exhaustion, a joke. The life inside her, precious, sacred, reduced to a spectacle of mockery. She felt smaller than she ever had, not because her body was weak, but because no one saw her as human anymore. At night, when the house finally fell silent, Zuri would sit on the edge of the bed, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the sheets to steady herself. She whispered apologies to her unborn children. "I'm trying," she told them. "I'm staying for you." Because leaving felt impossible. Where would she go? With no money, no family willing to stand against Bulma's power, no proof of the bruises that faded before morning. So she stayed. She told herself hope lived in endurance, that once the babies were born, things would change, that Bulma would see their faces and remember compassion, that his mother would soften, that love somehow would return. Hope became her last possession. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. Zuri's body grew heavier, her movements slower, but the workload never eased. She learned how to work through pain, so sharp it stole her breath, how to smile while her legs shook beneath her, how to silence her instincts when something felt wrong. Sometimes, alone in the kitchen, she pressed both hands against the counter, breathing deeply, fighting the fear rising in her chest. Fear that her body was giving up. Fear that the cruelty surrounding her was poisoning the life inside her. But fear, like everything else, had to be swallowed. Bulma noticed her silence and mistook it for obedience. He liked her better this way, quieter, smaller, less visible. Control to him was success. What he didn't understand was that silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's survival. Zuri stayed not because she was weak, but because she was a mother already, protecting lives no one else would. And even as cruelty wrapped itself tighter around her days, one fragile truth remained unbroken. She was enduring for her children, for the faint, stubborn hope that their future would not look like her present. She didn't know yet that endurance has a breaking point, and when it comes, it changes everything. Then came the night that changed everything. It began like so many others, a house filled with voices that weren't hers, laughter that never included her. The chandelier glowed too brightly, reflecting off the marble floors polished until they shone like ice. Guests filled the living room, dressed in silk and confidence, sipping drinks while Bulma played the perfect host. Zuri stood in the corner, 9 months pregnant, her body tight with exhaustion. Her ankles were swollen beyond recognition. Each breath felt shallow, as if her lungs no longer had room to expand. The babies inside her shifted restlessly, responding to her tension. She moved carefully, carrying a tray of glasses, praying silently that she wouldn't stumble. She did. It was barely a slip, a moment where her foot slid on the marble, the tray tilting just enough for a glass to shatter at Bulma's feet. The room went silent. Bulma turned slowly, his smile fading into something cold and sharp. He looked at the broken glass, then at her swollen belly, then back at her face, not with concern, but with irritation. "Look at you," he said loudly, "always making a mess." "I'm sorry," Zuri whispered, instinctively bending to clean it. "Don't touch it," Bulma snapped. Then, with a smile meant for the guests, he added, "She needs to learn." Confusion rippled through the room. Someone laughed awkwardly. Someone else shifted uncomfortably. But no one spoke. Bulma stepped closer. "Get down." Zuri froze. "I what?" "On the floor," he repeated, his voice calm, deliberate. "Since you want to act clumsy, crawl and clean it properly." The words didn't make sense at first. Her mind rejected them, as if refusing to believe reality could sink this low. She looked around the room, at the guests, at his mother seated proudly on the couch, at faces she hoped would intervene. No one did. His mother nodded once. "Do as your husband says," she murmured. The silence pressed in, heavy and suffocating. Zuri felt her heart pound against her ribs as if trying to escape. Her hands trembled. Slowly, painfully, she lowered herself to her knees. The marble was ice cold, sending shock through her body. Her belly strained forward, making it hard to balance. "Crawl," Bulma said, and so she did. Each movement was agony. Her knees scraped against the floor. Her hands shook as she reached for the glass, terrified of cutting herself, or worse, falling onto her stomach. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She could feel the babies pressing inside her, unsettled, frightened. Laughter broke out. Not from everyone, but enough. A few guests laughed nervously, unsure if this was a joke. Others looked away. One woman covered her mouth, eyes wide, but said nothing. The sound echoed through Zuri's chest like a hammer striking glass. Her dignity shattered piece by piece. She felt tears spill onto the marble, mixing with the fragments of glass. She didn't wipe them away. She couldn't. All her strength was focused on staying upright, on protecting the lives inside her as humiliation crushed her spirit. Bulma watched, satisfied. "See," he said lightly. "She learns fast." Something broke inside Zuri then, not loudly, not all at once, but completely. It wasn't just the humiliation. It wasn't just the pain. It was the realization that this was who he was and who he would always be. And worse, this was who he would be to her children. When she finally finished, Bulma waved a hand dismissively. "Go clean yourself up," he said. "You're embarrassing." Zuri rose slowly, her legs barely holding her weight. No one met her eyes as she walked out of the room. Not one person followed her. Not one voice asked if she was okay. In the bedroom, she stared at herself in the mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. Her hair clung to her skin with sweat and tears. She placed both hands on her belly. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, her voice breaking. "I didn't know it would come to this." The storm outside began suddenly, thunder cracking, rain pounding against the windows. The sky mirrored the chaos inside her chest. Moments later, Bulma's voice thundered through the house. "Get out." She stepped back, startled. "I don't want you here tonight," he said, standing in the doorway. "You've already ruined enough." "But the storm," she began. "I don't care." His hand slammed the door behind her as he pushed her out into the rain. The gate closed with a metallic crash, final and unforgiving. Zuri stood there, drenched within seconds, rain soaking her thin clothes, her hair plastered to her face. Thunder roared overhead. Her body shook, from cold, from shock, from the weight of what had just happened. For the first time, she didn't cry. She looked down at her belly, feeling the babies move, alive, innocent, trusting. And the truth hit her harder than any insult ever had. If she stayed, they would never be safe. Not from his cruelty, not from his control, not from a world that laughed while their mother crawled. The shame burned, but beneath it rose something stronger. Fear sharpened into clarity. That night, soaked in rain and humiliation, Zuri made a choice. Not to endure, not to hope for change, but to survive. She turned away from the house, from the marble floors, the laughter, the lies, and took her first step into the storm. Broken, yes, but awake. And once a woman chooses survival, power begins to follow. The road stretched endlessly ahead of her, dark, slick, and empty. Rain poured without mercy, soaking Zuri to the bone as she walked with no destination, only distance in mind. Each step sent pain shooting through her swollen body, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Behind her was cruelty. Ahead of her was the unknown. Thunder cracked above, lighting the road for brief, blinding seconds. Her clothes clung to her skin, heavy with rain. Her breath came uneven, sharp gasps tearing from her chest as fear began to settle deep in her bones. Then it happened. A pain unlike any she had known ripped through her abdomen. Zuri froze. Another wave followed, stronger, tighter, stealing the air from her lungs. She doubled over, gripping her stomach as a cry escaped her lips. The babies inside her shifted violently. "No, not now," she whispered, panic flooding her chest. But her body didn't ask for permission. Labor had begun. She looked around wildly. The road was empty, swallowed by darkness. No houses, no streetlights, just rain, wind, and the sound of her own ragged breathing. She tried to keep walking, but another contraction hit, dropping her to her knees on the wet asphalt. Pain tore through her again and again, relentless, unforgiving. Her strength drained rapidly, exhaustion wrapping around her limbs like chains. Her mind screamed for help, but her voice came out small, swallowed by the storm. Fear crept in, cold and sharp. What if no one comes? What if I lose them? She pressed her forehead to the ground, rain mixing with tears as she clutched her belly. "Please," she whispered to the night. "Please let them live." Minutes blurred into something shapeless. Pain, darkness, waiting. Then, through the roar of rain, she heard it. An engine. Headlights cut through the storm, slowing as they approached her crumpled form on the roadside. Zuri tried to lift her head, but another contraction hit, stealing her strength completely. The car stopped. A door opened. Footsteps splashed toward her. "Ma'am," a voice called out. Not angry, not suspicious. Concerned. "Urgent, are you okay?" Zuri barely managed to look up. A stranger stood over her, holding an umbrella uselessly against the rain. His eyes widened when he saw her condition. "She's in labor," he muttered, already pulling out his phone. He didn't ask why she was there. He didn't ask where her husband was. He didn't judge the soaked, trembling woman kneeling in the rain. He acted. Within minutes, she was inside the car, wrapped in a coat that wasn't hers, the heater blasting warmth in her frozen body. The stranger drove fast but steady, one hand on the wheel, the other speaking urgently into the phone with emergency services. "You're going to be okay," he told her, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. "Just breathe. I've got you." No one had said those words to her in years. Another contraction surged through her, stronger than the last. Zuri screamed, not from weakness, but from the raw power of what her body was doing. She felt something shift, something unstoppable. "We're almost there," the man said, his voice firm, grounding. "Stay with me." The hospital lights appeared like a miracle through the rain. Everything after that came in fragments. Hands lifting her, voices calling orders, bright lights burning her eyes, pain rising and crashing like waves she couldn't escape. Time lost meaning. All she knew was the fight, her body working beyond exhaustion, her spirit clinging to one purpose. Live, all of us. Then, finally, a sound cut through the chaos. A cry. Thin, fragile, perfect, tearful baby girl, someone announced. Zuri sobbed, her chest heaving as relief crashed in her like sunlight after endless night. But it wasn't over. Another contraction, another push, another scream ripped from her throat. A second cry followed, louder this time. Then a third. Triplets. 3 lives born from pain, survival, and an unbreakable will. As the doctors worked, placing the babies gently beside her, Zuri lay trembling, drained, broken but alive. Tears streamed freely down her face as she looked at them. 3 tiny faces, 3 beating hearts. Her children. No marble floors. No laughter of cruelty. No voice commanding her to be smaller. Only warmth. Only care. Only protection. A nurse placed a blanket over her shoulders, tucking it in gently, the way no one ever had. Another wiped her face, speaking softly, calling her strong. Strong. The word felt unfamiliar, but right. Later, when the storm had faded into distant rain and the room had grown quiet, the stranger who had stopped on the road stood at the doorway. He looked uncertain, almost embarrassed. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay," he said softly. Zuri met his eyes. She couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She simply nodded, tears filling her eyes again. "Thank you," she whispered finally. He smiled gently. "You did all the hard work." After he left, Zuri turned her gaze back to her children. She reached out, touching each tiny hand, grounding herself in the reality of their existence. For the first time in years, she felt safe. Not because someone controlled her, but because someone cared. She wasn't being ordered. She wasn't being watched. She wasn't being punished for existing. She was protected. As dawn crept through the hospital window, soft and golden, Zuri understood something with stunning clarity. The night she was cast out had nearly destroyed her, but it had also delivered her. She had walked into the storm broken and alone. She emerged with 3 new lives, and the first true breath of freedom she had ever known. And somewhere deep within her, beneath the exhaustion and scars, something new began to grow. Not fear, not obedience, but strength. Uncontrolled, unclaimed, unstoppable. Healing didn't come overnight. There was no dramatic moment where the pain disappeared, no single morning where Zuri woke up whole. Healing came quietly, in the small hours between feedings, in the slow rhythm of days that asked her to keep going even when her body still ached and her heart still remembered. The scars remained, but they no longer defined her. At first, survival was simple and exhausting, keeping 3 fragile lives warm, fed, breathing. Nights blurred into mornings. Sleep came in fragments. Some days she cried without knowing why, grief mixing with relief, fear tangled with hope. But stitch by stitch, Zuri rebuilt herself. While her babies slept, she learned. Online courses, borrowed books, free tutorials watched on a cracked phone screen. She absorbed knowledge the way a starving person absorbs food, desperately, gratefully. Skills she had once buried inside herself began to surface again. She started creating. At first, it was small, handmade pieces, designs shaped by instinct and memory. Her hands trembled sometimes, not from weakness, but from the weight of what they had endured. These were the same hands once forced to crawl across cold marble, palms scraped raw by humiliation. Now, they shaped beauty. She sold her first piece quietly, then another, then a third. Each order felt unreal, not just money, but proof. Proof that her worth had never belonged to the man who tried to erase her. Confidence grew slowly, like a cautious flame. With every finished creation, her posture changed. Her voice steadied. She stopped apologizing for taking up space. She learned how to say no. She learned how to protect her time. She learned that dignity is not something you ask for. It's something you claim. The triplets grew alongside her strength. 3 reminders of why she rose instead of broke. When she looked at them, she saw not fear, but legacy. They would never learn love through cruelty. They would never confuse control with care. And Zuri made sure of that. Her work began to travel farther than she expected. One share became 10. One recommendation became a waiting list. People admired not just what she created, but the quiet force behind it. They didn't know her full story, and she didn't rush to tell it. Power didn't need explanation. It showed itself in how she walked into rooms without shrinking, in how she negotiated without trembling, in how she smiled, not to please, but because she finally meant it. She was no longer a woman surviving in silence. She was rising in it, and slowly, the world learned her name, not as someone's wife, not as someone's victim, but as a creator, a mother, a force. Years later, her return would shake the very people who once laughed while she crawled. But that reckoning was still ahead. For now, Zuri stood firmly in her becoming. She had learned the hardest truth of all, that the same woman they try to break was the one who would one day stand unbowed, quietly powerful, unreachable, free. And this time, she would return not asking for mercy, but carrying it within herself. Zuri didn't return with revenge. She returned with self-worth. She didn't rise by destroying others. She rose by refusing to stay broken. Because sometimes, the woman forced to crawl is the very woman destiny prepares to stand tallest. And those triplets? They weren't born into weakness. They were born into a legacy of strength.